You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer.
Complete Developer Podcast is supported by listeners like you. We are now on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Complete Developer Podcast.
Brace yourself, the whiteboard question is coming. This week, we continue the Getting a Job series with a discussion of strategies and base knowledge levels for the dreaded whiteboard questions, or in more modern times, online coding challenges. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Well, the project I'm working on is going to UAT at the end of the week. I have about 20 bugs left, some of which I can delegate, and some of them I think are really server config. So
just a little woot for that.
Yeah. It's Monday night. I've already worked 9.5 hours. After you leave here, I'll probably work another 2. I want this project out the door. We're getting to the point now where we're not really noticing, being down a man, because everybody's kind of planning a little bit better. It's stung us a little bit. It's not as bad as it looked like it was going to be initially. In the meantime, I also got an email last week, and I'm going to be speaking at DevSpace in Huntsville in October.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I just requested time off to come down to it.
Nice. So if you happen to be down that way, come by. And I think we'll be probably talking about that a little bit more as we go on.
Yeah. And for those of you that are here in Nashville that come to our meetup, that is actually on the second Saturday. So we will be down there. And so the meetup will be down there for anybody that can make it.
Nice. I didn't think about that, but that is the case.
Yeah. And to get a 10% discount, use the code COMPLETEDEV or follow the link in the show notes. Again, that's DevSpace in Huntsville, Alabama on October 13th and 14th. And
also, if you're in Nashville, I'll be at Nashville Software School going over how to deal with whiteboard problems. And I probably will make that a recurring thing. So, don't be worried if you missed it. That's pretty much it, other than, it being my daughter's birthday today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, she plowed through. She decided today that she wanted to eat lunch. Like, okay, cool. She wanted sushi.
Sounds
cool.
right.
Yeah, that's par for the course. Tuna roll. She wanted the raw sushi. I don't know that my wife overly likes the idea of her eating raw fish, but she ate it and she likes it. So yeah.
Hey,
the kid kind of takes after me on that.
Yeah.
So how about you?
You were talking about UAT. We've been in the process of moving a couple of apps to UAT production the past few weeks. I've been mentioning it. It's been a bit hectic, as these are kind of the first of a new generation of apps to go out, where we've kind of changed the way that we've been. Well, I say we. I came on during this process, but they've changed the way that we're doing things, and these have both a customer-facing and an employee-facing side, and use several of our microservices or internal services that have recently been built and are on the other side of the firewall.
Right.
So it's been interesting.
So it hits the front end web server, and then it fans out into the back end services.
Yes,
which
exactly.
I really like that kind of architecture, because you only have one place for bad things to come through.
I like that architecture. What I don't like is when some of the services aren't finished and we're expected to use them.
Oh, yeah.
And changes keep getting made by the people working on that service that break things.
Right. You can't use a service until it's up to V1.
Yeah.
You can't consume it. I'm sorry. That's long life experience has taught me that doesn't work.
Well, that's some of the learning pains that we've been going through, and we're learning that.
Yeah. Same way I learned it, really.
Yeah, pretty much.
You learn to be flame retardant when you catch on fire.
Yeah. It's also interesting that we're talking about whiteboard interviews this week, as we're currently interviewing for a junior developer position at work. And I am not involved in the process, as I know quite a few of the applicants.
Yeah.
Because of that, I'm not involved in the interview process.
Yeah, because it is kind of a squirrely place to be when they're bringing on somebody that like if you know the one candidate out of 10, that's one thing, and you can kind of vouch for them and all that, and you could be in the interview. But when you know most of them, for one thing, it's going to chew up your day.
Yeah.
But the other thing is whoever loses out, that kind of creates personal.
Yeah, and that's the thing
there.
when I was talking to my boss, because every position that we've had for a developer spot, I've known someone applying.
Yeah.
And so I haven't been part of it. And she asked if I want, she's like, well, I guess, it doesn't matter at this point. Do you want to be part of it? And I said, well, I know too many people.
Yeah.
I don't want to be involved in 2 or 3 people's interviews and only one of them get the job.
Right.
Especially when it's not really my decision.
Right. Because, it just can backfire on you. You should probably go for like referral fees, though, or something.
I know.
Like, you got to figure out how to profit off of this and not step in it.
That's true. That's true. But also, since we're talking about whiteboards, I have something interesting from a maker of interactive whiteboards for IoTs. So let's go ahead and roll the music. This week for IoTs, I'm going to talk about cognitive whiteboards from Ricoh that use IBM Watson. While these are not for the average IoT builder or user, you might be able to see something like this in a corporate or educational environment. Ricoh has incorporated IBM Watson's natural language classifier API into their interactive whiteboards. The idea here is to create more efficient meetings through the use of technology. And one way it does that is language translation. So if you are in the US and talking to clients in Iceland, it will translate what they see that you write on the whiteboard.
Huh.
Now, this could be good or bad.
Yeah.
Depending on how well the translations work and how well you know your idioms.
Yeah. I've always wondered how you do machine translation from English to languages that are a bit more gendered, and like they have, like in Icelandic, for instance, the verbs are gendered, the nouns are gendered, and you have to get it exactly right, and it's not completely intuitive, and there's lots of weird edge cases, and so it'd be interesting to see how well that does. So if anybody's in Iceland and we can find somebody with one of these boards, we will try it.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
So if one of our listeners wants to hook us up on that, cool.
You guys can find out more about that through the link in the show notes. Who's talking to us this week?
Well, we got a comment on the Improving Your Listening Skills episode from Elvis Brockman. Says, I'm not sure where you're getting your information, but great topic. I need to spend some time learning much more or understanding more. Thanks for magnificent info. I was looking for this information.
Well, hey, thanks, Elvis. Check out the links at the bottom of the show notes for more on where we get our information. Also, send us an email with your contact information because we've got a Complete Developer water bottle just for you. Guys, if you'd like your very own Complete Developer water bottle, leave us a review in iTunes or comment on the website or any of our social media. We post all of our episodes to Google+, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we're also on Path and Tumblr. We're continuing the series on getting a job by talking about one of the most stressful parts of the interview. A lot of developers are great when they're in front of a computer with their IDE, but you put them in front of an interviewer or a group of them, and they get really nervous and make stupid mistakes. Especially if going out for the first job or even the first one in a new language or framework.
Yeah, or if they've been at a previous job for like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Because, you don't, this is not how we interact normally with a whiteboard.
That's true.
You get thrown in there, it might work.
Speak for yourself. We have whiteboards on all the walls at work now. And that is how we interact. We go up and we write it out on the whiteboard.
Yeah, ours mainly have catty comments on them. The occasional thing gets drawn out, but it's not code. It's like...
Yeah, it's rarely ever code. Occasionally, I'll go up there and when I'm trying to explain something, I'll write a little bit of pseudocode out, and people will see what I'm saying through that. But mostly it is architectural stuff. In this episode, we'll attempt to relieve some of this stress by walking you through the process. We'll talk about why this is important and then some specifics on whiteboard questions and coding challenges. So starting out, why are we talking about this?
Because It's hard not to go on a rant here because the whiteboarding phenomenon is yet another attempt in a long series of attempts to fix the hiring process for software developers. When I was coming up, we had they would give you like a list of questions and you had to be able to it was like multi-choice. I mean, this is, circa 2000, like around that time period, that's the way they handled it. And the reason is a pretty sizable chunk of the population that is in software development doesn't have a degree. They've not been through a code camp. There's a lot of people that learn this on their own because you can. You could
that's
in
the way
the
I got
90s.
into it.
You could in the 90s when you had to order a book. It's like you go to the bookstore, you find out what books are available by the way, you find out by magazine ads and things. Like the internet wasn't the thing.
I was around then. I remember.
Yeah, and so you order the book at the bookstore and you have it shipped to you, and then you go through it. Like I went through Visual Basic books that way, and I went through Access VBA books that way.
I went through C++ books that way.
Yeah.
I still tell her this.
Or you go to the big city and you go to the university bookstore.
Oh yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah.
Let's see. So a couple of things. One, my aunt, when I was in high school, bought me a couple of beginner C++ books, and she is the most technically unsavvy person in my family, other than my grandmother.
Right.
And yet she had heard me talk about it and remembered well enough that for my birthday she bought me a couple of books.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And that to me that was really awesome. But they were actually really good books. I went through them and I learned a lot.
Yeah, see, I earned the money for mine by picking up rocks out of the yard for $2 an hour.
Oh, wow.
You put them in a wheelbarrow, dump them in the pond. Go pick up more rocks, put them in a wheelbarrow, dump them in the pond. So, just say it took a little while.
Yeah.
But anyway, for a very long time, you've been able to learn programming concepts on your own. It's never been all that easy. I think it's a lot better now than it used to be, but it's still, it's not a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination. But that said, a whole lot of people manage to do that. Well, how do they prove their skill? Well, crap, we can't evaluate developers very well in a full-time job when they're sitting in front of you. To go, okay, I've got two good developers. Okay, I may know they're good and I may know which one's better, but I can't quantify that. I just have kind of this fuzzy, throw it at the wall kind of way of evaluating. And so when I have developers come in and they interview, I'm even more blind to what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so that's where all this stuff comes from. And so they end up basically building a set of, initially they built the set of questions, at least, when I was coming up. And then all these websites started having lists of questions. And so you just went through and you learned the answers basically. You reviewed it and you made sure that you could hit those points, but you'd get candidates in there that just, they came into the interview, they passed it with flying colors, and you put them in front of an IDE and nothing gets done. And 6 or 8 weeks later, you finally let them go after you've lost your hind end and your project's behind.
No, but they've made enough money and spent enough time there that they can move on to another job.
Yeah, and they may have actually learned enough to, at the next job that they're okay.
Yeah, they may be able to make it.
Especially in the boom right around 2000.
Yeah.
Or, a little bit later, right before 2008. And now it's starting to kind of come back around the same way. But basically, it's very, very hard to judge the skill of a developer effectively at an industrialized scale, which is what you need for hiring. As a result of that, what ends up happening is you have these maladjusted ways of evaluating them, and then you have people learning how to game that system because now the interviewees are incented to figure out how to pass. It's like standardized testing in schools, honestly.
Yeah, well,
that's exactly what's happening right now, right? There's the whole teaching to the test phenomenon or the accusation thereof. And by the way, how do you tell the difference between a kid that was taught to the test and a kid that actually knows? Well, you don't do it with the test. Mm-hmm. So you see the problem.
No, it seems like interviewing for tech jobs has been broken for quite a long time. It's hard to prove tech skills in an interview that lasts an hour or two, and especially when, like you said, the field can be crowded with poor candidates.
Yeah, especially at the lower levels. Like right now, the thing that's going around is, development. There's a lot of money in it. And there is. There's a ton of money in it. And there was in 2000 and there was in, right before 2008. As the market gets irrational and it's not really a bubble. It's just kind of foamy.
Yeah.
That's the way to put it. And, you get a lot of people that are like, oh, well, I'm going to do this because it pays a lot. Well, it pays a lot, but there's a lot to it. And a lot of people really want the pay and they don't want to own the work that goes into it. Mm-hmm. And so they don't do well.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people like that.
Yeah. I've worked with people like that. I've had to carry those people on my team. At pretty much every job I've had, honestly, at some point, I think I've carried somebody.
I've heard it said about people that they just wanted a job, so they got into development thinking it would be easy.
Yeah.
And these are the type of people that they go out and they do a few tutorials and they don't ever delve into the harder stuff.
Right. Which, I mean, you could do that, right? Like you can just get into the tutorials and get the bare top skill level. And then you go be a conference speaker. But sorry, we know a few of those too.
Said by the guy who is going to be speaking for the first time.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I feel like I have the bare minimum knowledge to be doing that after how many years?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just hard to prove your skill, and you end up with situations like multiple interviews and like hours and hours and hours of stuff because they don't have a good heuristic. And then you get turned down because, hey, they had, this company spent how many people came in? 50. And they did this with maybe a third of them, the top third, and they hired one guy.
Oh, exactly.
Who's the boss's nephew, probably. He's got some connection because the boss is just like, okay, come on in because I can't lose 6 staff for 2 months. Trying to hire somebody. Mm-hmm. By the way, they're paying by the minute. So, yeah, it's a horrendously busted process. I can't emphasize enough just how it's terrible because it's the worst thing that works. It's the worst thing that works. Or it's the best thing that we have. Yeah, at the moment.
It's one of those things where while it is horrible and it has lots of flaws, it's the best we've got to work with.
Right.
And the problem is it makes job searching painful and possibly very expensive if you're out of work.
Yeah, and I know a couple of developers that are out of work right now, and they're going through the hiring process, and even at the senior level. When you've got a trail of experience behind you, you've got to get through all these interviews, and it's hard.
Well, you remember when I was going through the process?
Yeah, it took you months.
Yeah,
and and bear in mind, you had my network.
Yeah,
like you weren't starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. It's rough.
The thing about this is, though, broken processes can be hacked to your advantage.
Broken processes must be hacked to your advantage.
Yeah,
I didn't put the right word in the outline. My bad. I mean, if you know what the employer is actually looking for, versus what they're asking for, you're ahead of like 90% of the people out there because they'll say certain things and they mean other things.
Yes.
Whiteboarding is it's basically a means to try to scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
A process. It's not a good filtering mechanism. Like you got a lot of basically junk that you got to filter out. Yeah. It's extremely busted. And that's why you want to, when you're having to explain these things, you have to explain them at length.
Mm-hmm. And also, if you're prepared in advance for the routine, the interview is a much easier process to survive.
Right. Because you don't get nervous.
Yeah.
Especially if you do like, you did, because, like you got a jerk of a friend that'll interview you until you're, like I remember I threw an eraser at your head. Yeah. Because I was like, you are not going to flinch when you go into a whiteboard interview because there's nobody that's going to be as bad. And I know that sounds horrendous to anybody that's listening, but holy crap, did it help? It had to have.
It really did. Like when I went into an interview, I know I had one interview that they made me a job offer after I'd already taken the job that I have now. But I had an interview at a place that I could not remember a certain method call to do a sort.
Yeah.
So without missing a beat, I said, I can't remember the exact method call, but here's what it does. And I described a bubble sort to him.
Right. And it was dot order by in link because you'd also been doing stuff in JavaScript and SQL.
Yeah.
And it was just too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I think I told him, I was like, I can remember how to do this in JavaScript, but I can't remember how to do it in C#. Yeah. It just like, it was not there, but I explained what it did such a way that the one guy who had been just like riding me the whole interview suddenly became on my side.
Yeah.
Like, that impressed him so much that he came to my defense a couple of times so I didn't understand, like, certain terms, where it's just like, all right, if you don't have a CS degree, you're not going to know what these terms are.
Right.
Kind of thing. And he stopped the guys that were asking. He's like, wait, he's not coming from a CS background. And he explained it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can describe that. I can talk about it. So, having that can help you kind of flip the script on an interview.
Yeah.
And I know you've been on both ends of it.
Yes. And it's actually, it honestly feels a lot worse from the interviewing end than the interviewee. Because you screw up on the interview, like, you're going to be right back in this same room.
Yeah.
Whereas the interviewee goes, whew, I got away. That's the way it feels anyway. It's not really that way from the other end, but it's just like, it feels like a much more monumental screw up.
Well, while I have interviewed people for jobs not in the tech field, I have yet to do a tech interview where I gave someone a whiteboard question. Now, I have given some at our developer launchpad meetups.
Right.
And walked people through those. I think the most interesting was our friend Chang that did it in Python.
Yeah.
And both of us are like, all right, walk me through what you did.
Yeah.
Because neither one of us really know Python.
Yeah.
And we learned some pretty cool stuff from him, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's a special case, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
You got two hillbillies basically interviewing this Vanderbilt PhD data science. we're basically post turtles. You know what a post turtle is, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a turtle on top of a fence post. Like, he didn't get there himself. He shouldn't be there, and he's screwed for being there. That's where we were.
But he seemed to really enjoy it. He said he got a lot out of it because it gave him practice just doing it.
Yeah.
And walking through it. Speaking of practice, the great thing about this is you can practice for these parts of the interview. I was asked by one of the guys that is going through the interview process about how to prepare for it. And I told him,
he kind of asked me about it too.
Yeah. And my response was, if you're doing code katas like you should, you'll be fine. And I told him my code kata story. I've shared on here a few times. I'll probably tell it again somewhere in this episode.
Yeah.
But
it's coming, folks.
Yeah, it is. But his response was, what's a code kata? And this is someone that he's new to the field. He just finished up a boot camp, and so he wasn't familiar with it. And I pointed him in the direction. But what I'm getting at here is that the technical side of interviewing, it's really the easiest part to practice.
Yeah.
You want to get into the habit of doing code katas or challenges on a regular basis. And we had an entire episode just on code katas.
Yeah.
And this is why. Another thing you can do, and this is something Will kind of hinted at a little bit, is something I did, which was look up technical interview questions in your area of expertise.
Yeah, because you got to also bear in mind that a lot of the people that are going to be interviewing you are either HR people that don't know or developers who are lazy. Right. And so they're going to have a set of questions, and they're going to find those by Google.
The other thing, too, is even if they don't do that, by researching those questions, it's going to make you more comfortable.
Yeah.
So you may not get the exact question, but you may get something similar, because there's only a finite amount of information that a junior developer should know, or that you can know about a thing. I know I had one interview where there was one question that they'd given me kind of this short answer form, and I looked at it and I'm like, I have no clue. So I wrote on there, I could look this up on my phone, but my ethics won't let me.
Yeah.
So I'll do it when I get home.
Right.
And the one interviewer, he was two senior devs were doing the interview. One guy looked at it, he just started laughing. I told him, I said, the phone part? He's like, yep. He hands it to the other guy. He's like, well, just read it to him. He's like, no, you got to read this for yourself.
Yeah.
And apparently the guy that read it and laughed and handed it to the other one, he looks at me, he's like, man, I had to look that one up myself. He asked that. I don't know where he got that question from.
Yeah.
And they ended up telling me the whole purpose of that question was to see if I would admit I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And
I ask those kind of questions too.
Yeah. And that's part of the technical interview. You can prepare for some of this by creating a review sheet of the common questions. What I would do is I would go, if they were an Angular shop with C#, I would go and create a review sheet for Angular and one for C#, where I'd look up a couple of different sets of questions and I'd find the common ones across the board. and I just create this review sheet, or ones that I thought this is really important, I should know it.
Yeah.
That I could go over the night before. Another way to do this is to create flashcards. Now, mind you, I came into this straight out of med school, so everything I did was review sheets and flashcards.
Straight out of med school. You ought to make a parody. We'll have to make a parody of that now, because that's got to be a thing.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is whiteboards. The whiteboard interview process. You and I have both been through this.
Quite a few times, actually.
Yeah, me too. The most recent time was the one where I interviewed for the job I have now, and it was almost an afterthought. It was like the interview went so well, we were getting up to leave when he said, "Oh, by the way, would you mind doing this?"
Yeah.
It's like he stood up and saw it.
Right.
But you'll be given a problem that should be solvable in less than an hour at most. Really?
Hopefully a few minutes, but
I was going to say, I have not had any that were more than... If I was spent much time on the whiteboard, it was multiple questions. It was like, solve this one, they'd erase it, and then write another one up there.
Yeah, I've heard tales of some pretty nasty interview processes at some of the really big companies in the industry. I mean, like, you're not going to go, like, if it's Joe's software shop, you know, they're not going to do this to you, but you go to some of the bigger players.
Okay.
You know, like Google interviews, for instance, are supposedly just horrendously rough, and so are Microsoft ones.
I'm not surprised that they want...
Yeah, they want the top-notch thing, and they want to really, really prove it, because they have a lot of applicants, and so...
They have a lot of applicants, and there's a lot on the line for them.
Yeah.
And at a more junior level, it's going to be easier.
Yeah.
You know, and that might be why I've not seen some of the longer ones, is because I was applying for junior positions.
Right.
I've yet to apply for a senior position, so when I do, eventually, I will probably see some of these longer whiteboard, unless we have, by that time, a better system.
Right. You know, which will probably be... It'll probably be even worse. You know?
Interviewing's hard, bro.
So, yeah, it is. It's just rough. So the problems that they give you on these typically will have some relevance to the sort of problems the organization typically deals with, if they're any good at this kind of stuff. I know on my interview where I work, I got nailed on all kinds of SQL stuff, you know, like how do you deal with cursors, which is an old, like, you try not to do those, but they're in our database. You know, a lot of really nasty joins and those kind of things. I got grilled on GDI plus programming, like, you know, dealing with Windows, you know, the Windows API at a low level. A lot of those kind of things, you know, growth rates of algorithms. I mean, like, I got hit with a bunch of nasty.
Oh,
of course, one of the things was a mutual friend of ours, one of the guys interviewing me. I think they'd been through a number of candidates and a number of employees in the past that said they could do things and couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, they raked me over the coals on that. So now I passed, obviously, because I've been working there for almost 2 years.
Yeah. And that's, you know what? You're going to see places like that. Yeah. And if you're not at that level or you're not ready for that, that's perfectly fine.
Right.
It's just a way of knowing, hey, this isn't the right place for me.
Yeah. Whereas if you are ready for it, you should absolutely relish the fact to prove that. You know, the time to prove that.
That's very true. That's very true. You'll start solving the problem on the board. Occasionally, you'll be prompted by the interviewer with questions, or if they notice that you're kind of taking some time getting stuck somewhere, they may kind of push you in one direction or another.
Right, because most of the interviewers, I mean, they got interviewed this way too, and they know what parts are rough. Like, you don't, typically, if you made it to the interview process and you haven't made a bad impression, these people are on your side to some degree. Now, they may have another candidate they prefer, but, like, they're not hostile most of the time. You'll get one or two that are, but it's not, you know.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it was through the whiteboard that I got one of the guys on my side. Yeah.
And I've done that in a few interviews too, where I've, you know, gone in there and gotten somebody on my side that didn't want to hire me.
Yeah.
Because the contact that got me the job, or that got me the interview, was the CEO that they kind of thought was hiring a lot of cronies.
Yeah.
And then it turned out it's like, well, no, this guy this guy's legit. That's fine. If there is time, the interviewer will look at your completed solution and then prompt you to make it more elegant in some cases. Which I know you had a problem with that on your whiteboard interview where you work right now, because I think they were planning on doing that to you. And then you just like whipped out a one-liner that the interviewer just looks at and goes,
Yeah. He looked at it and he just kind of, he stumbled over his words, and I said, did I do it wrong? Is it bad? And he's like, I've never seen anybody solve it that way before.
Yeah.
He's like, usually it takes 2 or 3 iterations just to get to that point.
Right.
He's like, there's nothing I can ask you to do to make it better, because that's exactly the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I told him. I was like, well, the reason I kind of chuckled when I saw it is I'd been doing this exact same thing as a code kata for the last week and a half.
Yeah.
And so I had worked it down to where I could do this in one line of code, which is why I really am a huge proponent of code katas.
Because it makes a big difference, and having, mentorship as well.
Yeah, because if you have someone that can sit there with you as you work your way through, and earlier on you would help me out,
right? And
further down the line you got less helpful and more interviewer.
Yeah, and then eventually I got to the point where it's like
then you got mean.
Yeah, then I just got completely mean because it was conditioning. Where you could just go through it. I had an interview.
And the next time that I need to interview for a job, I will be over here at the whiteboard.
Yeah, for a lot of time.
Yeah.
But, I had an interview, and it's been, good grief, it's been 10 years or more. They brought me in, and I had to answer a SQL question on the board. And they were asking me how to join 2 tables. And I said, well, it depends on what you're trying to get out of it, right? Because it was like people and addresses. And I said, well, if you want the people with their addresses, you use an inner join. But if you want the people that don't have addresses, you want a left outer join, and then where some column and the other one's null. And if you want the addresses that are orphaned and they don't have people associated with them anymore, you do a right outer join. And if you want all the possible combinations, you want a cross join. So which one do you want? And the interviewer looks at me for a second and he goes, okay, so we're going to scrap all the SQL questions. You got this. Look at these as an opportunity. Like, it sucks, but you can jump way above everybody else if you do this right. And that's what we both have done plenty of times. Mm-hmm. It's probably important here to start to talk about the goals that the interviewer has, because this is what people seem to be getting wrong when they get all freaked out about the whiteboard. The biggest thing is to show that you actually know how to think programmatically. In other words, you can get inside the computer's head, because you have to do that all day, every day. But another big one is to show that you can clearly communicate your ideas. Like, you can explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. You might be building a search algorithm, like in your example. Okay, you did bubble sort. Well, you understood a search algorithm, and you can explain what you were doing. You didn't do a quick sort, which would have been more efficient. But you still showed, hey, I know how a search algorithm works, and I can explain it on the board what's going on here. Like, that's what they're looking for.
Finally, they really want to see how you respond to feedback on your ideas. How you work with the team.
Yeah, because you could be right and they could be wrong, but the way that you explain it makes a huge difference. If they go, why didn't you use quick sort? It's like, well, the data set's 4 items. The growth rate's not going to make enough difference in the execution time. And oh, by the way, this is in a linked list, so I can just change the pointers. Mm-hmm. I'm not moving items in memory. So nobody really cares as much. It's not like I'm reallocating an array. Like, if you can explain it that way and go, hey, look, and you can do it without maybe the cattiness even that I explained just now, that will go a lot further than anything else.
Exactly. So as we mentioned earlier, you can practice for whiteboard interviews.
Yep.
Look up common whiteboard problems for your language or framework or the languages that you work in, and practice doing them like they're code katas.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked about my whiteboard interview multiple times. I think I've talked about it pretty thoroughly on this episode, but code katas helped me out big time there. The other thing is get a whiteboard to practice on.
Yeah. And if you can't get a whiteboard because reasons, I'm not sure what those would be, because whiteboards are cheap.
Yeah.
If you can't get a whiteboard, printer paper will work. Write it in the dirt.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, if you look at, just as an aside, one thing I hear from a lot of American programmers is, I can't do this. I can't do this because of these reasons. If you talk to a programmer from Africa, those people figure stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And I legitimately think there's probably a couple of dozen programmers who are going to change the world in Africa right now, doing whiteboard problems with sticks in the dirt because they're motivated. Yeah. And let me tell you something. Those people are going to change things, and like don't let anything stop you. Just figure out how to make it work.
Exactly. Also, explain it to someone, even if they're not technically savvy.
Especially if they're not technically savvy.
Yeah. You can use a rubber duck, but it is so much better to get used to doing these in front of real people.
Right.
There is something about explaining things to people, especially when they don't know already.
Right. And having the ability to put that into metaphor.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I swear, I think that's gotten to be I didn't realize how valuable that was until people have told me that. Because I do have to explain stuff a lot of times to non-technical people, and I've gotten pretty good at it.
Well, see, this is something that comes very naturally to me.
And to me, too.
We grew up
Church of Christ, and you have all the parables and stuff from the Bible, and so you learn that, hey, this is a good way to get points across to people.
It really is. It's like we went to a private Christian school that drilled that idea in our heads, and of all the things they taught us, that's probably one of the most useful things that I gained from college and just from growing up in that mentality is the use of parable.
Yeah.
And metaphor. So a few important things to realize in order to win when it comes to whiteboard interviews.
Whiteboard tests do not show how productive you're going to be when you're actually using an IDE. Whiteboards don't compile. So it's a completely different skill set, different habits and all that. They're also
unless you have a smart whiteboard.
Right. Which I'm sure we'll probably put an affiliate link up. I'm kidding. We're too lazy to do that. But whiteboard problems are also very highly reliant on memory. And if you're using a modern IDE, you're not.
Mm-hmm.
I've done C# in Notepad, and I've compiled on the command line because I was on a road trip and Visual Studio decided that I didn't have a license, even though I did. Long story, long time ago. But you don't do that normally. This is not a thing that a normal person does. It just ticked me off enough. You're relying on memory, and your memory really has very little to do with how productive you are at coding because you have tools that help you. You also have Google most of the time. You're not going to be in an air-gapped computer writing Visual Studio code. For one thing, NuGet isn't going to work.
Yeah.
All your package managers don't work with no internet connection. So you're probably okay. Now, on a few things you're going to have enough common sense to go, okay, well, if I'm doing low level, there may be some things that I have to actually remember. Like the lower level, you probably do. The higher level, not as much.
It depends on where you are and what you're doing, really.
Yeah. Because if you're doing embedded, that's another can of worms.
Oh, yeah.
Or if you're doing kernel manipulation,
Yeah.
This is the kind of guys that you sit there and you go, okay, well, why don't you just... why don't you attach a debugger to it, and they look at you, and you go, okay, that's fair. Why don't you dump the stack, and they look at you. You go, why don't you write it to disk, and they look at you. You go, well, couldn't you dump it out to screen, and they look at you, and they go, no, it didn't happen. Why? That's all they have. So those people, they're going to rely on memory. That's fine. Normal people, probably not.
That's the thing. This and most of our episodes are not really designed for them.
Yeah, we need to get a super low level programmer on here to explain the differences.
Yeah, I mean, our going low in a high level language helped a little bit with that. It helped me at least.
Yeah,
but yeah, I agree.
That's not low.
No, that's not. No, getting someone that does the kind of stuff that
somebody that messes with the kernel.
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody that sits there and goes, well, I have trouble remembering how to do this with mutexes. when you have somebody that says stuff like that, this is a different game for y'all. Yep. But for most developers, the whiteboard problems are very reliant on memory, and your day-to-day is not as much.
Mm-hmm. If you're doing whiteboard interviews, your personality is a much bigger asset than it is in a coding challenge.
Right, because how do you express personality in a coding challenge? What, you got ASCII representations of dragons or something? I mean, what are you going to do?
variable names.
Yeah, variable names. Like tell a story with your variable names. There was a guy I went to school with that would do that with his variable names, and he would tell a story.
Can't say I've never done that.
And they were usually fairly foul.
Can't say I've never done that.
Can't say I haven't either.
Yeah. Anyways.
You saw it.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, your personality, your ability to interact with people, your soft skills that we talked about last week.
Well, that's what they're testing.
Yeah, that's going to come into play more with the whiteboard, because you're doing this not I'm creating code and sending it to someone to review. You are writing it in front of people, explaining it to them as you go along.
Yeah.
So your personality is very important when it comes to this. Now we're going to get into coding challenges.
Yeah, coding challenges, I think, is probably the next phase after whiteboard interviews, because it's starting to kind of hit a little bit.
Well, like where I work, we do both.
Yeah. Well, and that's good because it gets people that maybe are a little socially awkward or nervous. They can go home, like the most brilliant programmers you ever meet. A lot of times they can't get on a whiteboard and do things. I know people that are way smarter than I am that just bomb whiteboards. And so this is intended, coding challenges are intended to give them some means to get into the job.
Yeah, typically you'll do this on site or remotely via remote desktop.
Right.
I've had some that I've done where I actually was on the phone with, it was a guy that actually contracted in to do interviews.
Right.
And it was in the evening. We had a shared screen and he told me the challenge and I worked it out. And it wasn't JS Fiddle. It was one of those it was a like online IDE that you could use.
And I've had to, I've done this before, with some of the recruiters we know that they've had clients that have had a, coding challenge that they give to candidates and none of the candidates were passing. Mm-hmm. And so I've had recruiters pay me to go and take that and go, okay, evaluate it for the client. And of course, like I did one and they're like, okay, this will probably take 30 minutes to an hour. And I did it in one line of code. It was, like I told the interviewer, I said, hey, like since I'm evaluating this, and I'm a senior developer, and I said, do you mind if I have a beer while I do this? Cause I just got home and, and we kind of chat while we're doing it. And I did it in one line. The guy goes, you looking for work? I said no. But I was kind of talking to him about his process, and that's what the intent was to get people that could actually code versus people that could pass whiteboard problems.
No, other times they just send you the problem to do.
Yeah, I had one like this for a company here in town, and I really, really want to interview the owner of this company because I did not pass that interview. And it was legit. It was JavaScript, and it was more than I was capable of. Then I could do it now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. In fact, I still have the question somewhere, I think.
Essentially, they give you a software problem to solve and you code up the answer.
And what's weird about these is they will judge you on comments, even though their own source code probably doesn't have any. That is one thing you do have to kind of watch because it's also not a good mirror of what the reality is. Like you got to bear in mind, these are simulations.
I would say that kind of depends on whether or not it's timed.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. And if it's timed, you're not going to have as much time to go in and put in comments.
Right. Well, you write through the problem first, and then if you have time left over, you go back and comment. And then you look like you're fastidious, even though you're totally not. Because you're just trying to, use up the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. I hate to sound kind of jaundiced about these, but like I do feel like it's still broken.
It's possible to use Google while doing this in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's expected.
Right. And the one that I got sent there, that I bombed on, I had Google.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It whooped me. And I got halfway through it. I knew I wasn't going to make it. Mm-hmm. I still finished it, but
you'll typically not be prompted or prodded along while doing this. Unless it's done live, like I was talking about where I was on the call with the guy and screen sharing. And honestly, even then, he didn't really prompt or prod me that much until I got stuck on something. It was like the third or fourth one that he gave me that I got stuck on. And I was like kind of trying to remember the syntax and stuff. And he kind of prodded me along on that. So,
yeah, the other thing that, like, I don't know that I've ever been prodded along very much on these, but one thing I've noticed that they try to do with these kind of coding challenges is they're also measuring your ability to work remotely. Because this is something that's used a lot in jobs that allow you to work remote or allow you to work disconnected. So if it's a company that's completely okay with you taking your laptop and going to the coffee shop because, idiots are playing foosball in the office and it's loud, they want to test your ability to work remote and to be kind of autonomous. And so they'll do these kind of questions for that reason as well.
If you are given a coding challenge, there are quite a few goals for the interviewer. First off, they want to see that you can solve an actual software development problem using actual tools.
Yeah. And I mean, I even had one where it was live. I sat down at a desk and I solved a problem in their code base that they'd found that day.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
that really is.
That contract was good too.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. They also typically want to see that you can solve a problem using a particular tool chain and language rather than looking for general development thought processes. Like your whiteboard interviews, those tend to look at the way you think about things and the way you solve problems. This is looking at how you use the tools to solve the problem.
Right. Like, for instance, if you're interviewing for a JavaScript job, but it's heavily influenced by Angular, they're going to expect that you are going to solve a problem with Angular, not React or Knockout or vanilla JavaScript or jQuery or something else. And that kind of makes sense because you typically see these in more of a tactical type of coding environment versus whiteboards, which tend to have tend to be at companies that are a little bit more strategic and also a little bit more old school because obviously they haven't caught up to the new way of doing things. And that's what this is. The other thing is if you are not being observed, they want to make sure that you don't just copy and paste the first answer that you found on Stack Overflow. So if you do go and look and you're allowed to go look, do not copy and paste. Type the answer out, name the variables in a meaningful way. Look at how the problem was solved, but don't necessarily copy and paste it because you will get busted on that.
If you're working in a job, don't copy and paste from Stack Overflow.
Yes, please. And don't do it from MSDN either.
Oh, don't ever do it from MSDN. I was about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because, the thing is those kind of examples are built specifically to explain how to do something, but not how to do it in a production environment. So they'll go, okay, you open a database connection, you do some things and you close it, but they won't say, okay, what happens if there's an exception? The database connection leaking is not okay. But, if you look at an MSDN article, that's what you're going to see is stuff that will leak because it's not intended to be production code.
Now, we'll say one thing that I have seen a mid-level developer do. She would take and copy the code from Stack Overflow and
comment it out and say, this is what the answer was on Stack Overflow. And
yeah, she would do that. Or she would copy it in and then create a method below it and work through that code so she didn't have to back and forth. I've seen that too.
Yeah. I just would be really, really cautious on anything like that because
those are not not production code.
It's that, and you're also losing the ability to differentiate yourself because everybody else has access to that too. Mm-hmm. So, don't give away an advantage, even if it saves you just a little bit of time. It's just not worth it. The other thing that, unobserved tests will do for you is sometimes they'll leave stuff out. This is a really good way to test your skills at communicating in a disconnected environment. So they'll give you part of a problem or it'll be missing one little thing. And then you have to communicate back and go, hey, what about this? Mm-hmm. This thing's returning an object of this type, but I don't know what's on that object. What does this interface look like? And you'll forget this when you're coding. They either want to see that you can plan ahead and see that, or that you know how to ask the questions and get what you need.
or they just screwed up in writing the question. I've seen that too.
Yeah. But the thing is, they're probably not going to admit they screwed up, and they're going to say it's for one of the other reasons.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're going to cover themselves on that.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, if you call them out on it and do it in a way that, this comes back to a little bit of personality and a little bit of interacting with people. But if you call them out on that in a way that is, hey, I need this information to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And you treat it like they are testing you,
Right.
then they save face if they did oops.
Yes. And
it makes you look phenomenal because you caught it.
yeah, or if you go, hey, I really like that trick. That's a good way to do that. But by the way, what does that object look like?
Yeah.
You know? and you know, being able to save face, like you'd be surprised how important that is in a corporate environment. People don't want to hire somebody that's going to undercut them, especially if they're trying to move up, which they may well be doing if they're doing the interview process.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
You know, their boss moved out. They're hiring you to replace them, and they're replacing their boss. Like, I don't know how many jobs I've had that have been like that. Now, if you are being observed, this is basically just a slightly nicer whiteboarding problem. Or the interviewer doesn't know how to do a coding challenge properly. It might be that it's a slightly nicer whiteboarding problem, and that's probably fair to make that assumption. And you should, for the benefit of your interviewer. But yeah, it's really weird trying to type. The other thing I've gotten when I've done this is, holy crap, you type loud. Well, do you have a mechanical keyboard? It's like, no, I have a soft keyboard. I started on one of those IBM ones that you could beat somebody to death with and then go type a novel. Like with the mechanical switches. You remember those? I remember those. And I mean, I've had that comment before, and it's like, no, I'm like, look, I put a towel under it.
No, I told you. I'm pretty sure I told you about, there is a place here in town that makes mechanical keyboards.
Yeah.
Like, we can go to their factory store and get you a high quality mechanical keyboard that will last you longer than 6 months.
Yeah. Well, I mean, mine have both lasted almost 2 years.
Oh, really? I thought you went through about 2 a year. Maybe I got that backwards. Maybe it's you go through one every 2 years.
No, I normally go through about 2 a year. For some reason, not as much here lately. I don't know if it's like less anger or, I mean, I jam my fingers on keyboards. Okay.
Yeah.
Like that's hard to type.
Oh, I've heard you typing.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the listener has not, because I edit that out. But
yeah, but I mean, that's the favorite comment when people overhear it. They're like, "Holy crap, we're gonna have to put this guy like he's gonna have to be in the corner of the basement. We're gonna have to we need a sound recording booth, and we'll just put him in it."
There you go. That works. Sometimes an observed coding challenge problem is kind of an attempt to see how you code under pressure.
Yeah, and if you ever see this, and you start to kind of understand that, hey, this is what they're going for, you need to think about what that implies.
Yeah.
Because I've had a few of those where they'll do it and they won't, it's like you'll have 20 minutes to do this thing and it's going to take you 30. And it would take a really good coder 30.
Yeah.
And it's to see how you handle just extreme pressure. Do you take shortcuts? Do you lie? Do you do this other stuff? But if they're putting you under that kind of pressure, that's because that's an artifact of their environment. And you need to think about whether you're comfortable dealing with that or not.
Some people thrive under pressure. Some people enjoy that kind of pressure.
Yeah.
And if that's you, then this might be the right place for you. Just like with the whiteboard problems, you can practice for code challenges. Do code katas. I cannot repeat this enough. Do code katas. This is where they come in most helpful, as you're going to be in the same type of environment doing them as you are doing a code challenge.
Well, the other thing too is if you're doing the code katas and you're optimizing it each time and figuring out how to shorten it, kind of like what you did, or you're figuring out your IDE keystrokes. When they go, okay, can you do this? You go and just kick that out with a bunch of keystrokes real fast, especially with shortcut keys. They just go, ooh, because
I got asked, are you sure you're a junior developer?
Right.
And I'm like, yeah.
That's like,
doesn't everybody? Isn't this coding?
Yeah. That's like my boss. I was doing something in Delphi, and I did a shortcut key combination that I had learned because I drill.
Yeah.
And he's like, "What'd you just hit to do that?" And I had to, to be honest, I had to go, I don't know, because I'd done it so much, I'd practiced. And if you can do that in an interview, like you talk about being on superior ground, because now you show that, okay, I've been in this IDE long enough that I'm completely comfortable.
Oh yeah, exactly. To do this, look up common code challenges that are used for interviews and then create your own code katas around them.
Yeah.
Do what we were talking about. Do what I did or do what Will does, where you take that kata or you take that challenge and you work on the same challenge, making it either simplifying it or getting better with your keystrokes or whatever.
Whatever the thing is you need to work on.
Yeah, and work on that for a couple of weeks and then do another one and then do another one and then go back and redo some.
Yeah, and do it every day.
Yeah.
If possible. Like, you don't need to do just, for 2 or 3 days and then stop and then interview for 6 months.
Yeah.
Like,
oh,
it's
no,
not going to help
doing
you.
this. I was doing this while I interviewed, and when I got really serious about interviewing, it wasn't one code kata a day like normal, like I do now, where I have one code kata that I do for like a week. It was, I set aside a couple of hours, and I'd work on one for 30 minutes and another for 30 minutes, and I'd get like 4 challenges in a day.
Yeah, I should have made you just go out and do code katas in the dirt. At that point, like, you're basically being trained to be Zorro.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. At least you weren't that mean.
Yeah.
So, some important things to realize in order to win. These are the sorts of tests that don't do a very good job of showing how well you interact with the team. Your interactions with other people don't matter as much on these tests.
Yeah. Unless you just really screw up, it's not going to probably make a difference. Or unless they threw a curveball.
Yeah. They are highly reliant on your ability to execute and write code that other people like. Your personality doesn't really come into it much. You'll frequently be given code challenges for jobs where you'll be working alone, or like Will mentioned before, working remote, or even leading a team.
Right, because if you're the team leader, like if they're looking into more architect type stuff, they're looking to see that you have a consistent style, that you have a sane way of approaching things, that you don't waste effort.
Exactly. So we've discussed the importance of the technical side of interviews, as well as specifics on whiteboard problems and coding challenges. We also talked about how the system isn't perfect and you can use this to your advantage. The best thing you can do for improving your ability, though, is to practice. For both the whiteboard and code challenges, as well as for answering technical questions during the interview, practice will help you move from terrified to competent to comfortable. Before your interview, review questions on the language or framework or whatever you're going to be using. Get into the habit of doing daily code katas. This is something that's really important. I've repeated it several times because of that. These will help you with both whiteboard and coding challenges. Also, practice explaining the solution to someone, even if they're not a technical person, especially if they're not. You'd be surprised how well you get to know something when you explain it to other people. That pretty much wraps us up. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, I did say something a little earlier in this episode that's probably, unconventional, maybe potentially something that people look at as unethical, and that is that you should use broken systems to your advantage. We've talked about how whiteboard interviews are a sign of a broken hiring process, and we've talked about how coding challenges also frequently are. And the thing about it is that broken system is still the system that you're living under. You really can't escape it till you get to a certain point of skill and marketability. Like, I think I could probably skip the coding challenges at this point because I think enough people know who I am, and the same thing with you, BJ. But for the average person out there that's not spent a lot of time on their marketing, you're not known well enough to get around that. As a result, you have to face a broken system. Now, do you want, you obviously want to make sure your skills are up to a decent level, right? You don't want to get somebody to hire you fraudulently. So get your skills up to an appropriate level, but then look at the process and go, okay, how do I hack this? How do I put myself at an advantage in this broken system? And there's several reasons for that. One is you got to eat. Another reason to exploit broken systems or to twist them to your advantage is that's how broken systems die. If enough people have figured out how to hack around the broken system, it gets replaced with something better. Whiteboard problems were better than the multiple choice quizzes that we got when I was coming up. Coding challenges are better than whiteboards. Something else will come along. Companies and larger organizations do not learn that their systems are broken until they start feeling consequences for those systems being broken. Other people will be exploiting those systems, and you need to learn to do the same. granted, bring the skills and the value to the table that you say you're going to bring. Like, I'm not saying lie. I'm saying look at it and go, okay, what are they trying to test for? How do I make sure that I excel in that? That's all I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.